charge of Haiti? The government of this country of 11 million people is in chaos following the assassination of President Jovenel Moise in the early morning hours of July 7. Haiti's acting head of state is being challenged. The parliament is almost vacant because elections have not taken place, and many unanswered questions remain about the assassination investigation. Where do we stand? Good evening and welcome to the program on this gray day in Dallas. Thanks for joining us. I'm Liz Brailsford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Our program this evening was designed to offer quick analysis and context on the breaking news out of Haiti, and we are thrilled to have with us Paula Caldwell St-Onge, who served as the Canadian ambassador to Haiti from 2014 to 2017. Council President Emeritus Jim Falk joins Paula to break this down for us. We're always happy to partner across the council community, and tonight I'd like to thank President Charles Shapiro and his team over at the World Affairs Council of Atlanta for their promotional support. It's great to have you with us. And the council will continue to offer top-tier virtual programming through summer and into the fall. So continue to check out our website at dfwworld.org for newly scheduled events. Tonight we have our council president emeritus Jim Falk. As mentioned, Jim is also the co-host of the McQuestion program on KERA, and we thank him for joining us tonight. And with that, Jim, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Liz, and what fun to be with everyone today, even if this is a tough topic. But I am so delighted to introduce Ambassador Paula Caldwell. That'll be the last time I call her ambassador because she is a close friend of so many of you that are on this program. She is a distinguished diplomat, once a diplomat, always a diplomat. And what you might not know is that a few years ago, she even rode with me in the hotter than hell, that 100-kilometer ride in Wichita Falls, Texas. Paula was the Consul General from Canada to the South Central United States from 2010 to 2014. She covered, of course, Texas, but also Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico. But we're here tonight to talk about Haiti. And she left Dallas to become the ambassador to Haiti from 2014 to 2017, but it wasn't her first time there. She lived in Haiti from 1978 to 1982, in fact, graduated from the American School of Haiti. She speaks Creole, not a lot of diplomats do. But I want to tell you a little bit more about not Paula, but her dad, Alan. Alan often visited in Dallas, and that was her secret weapon. He read opinion pieces, newspapers, books, highlighted them for her so that when she came home from a long day, she had extra work. But also, Alan provided information to me at the World Affairs Council, and he'd say, Jim, you have to read this book and have that speaker. So he passed away a few years ago, and we miss him greatly. After Paula left Haiti, she became Director General for Pan-African Affairs. And she's also served throughout her long career as Senior Trade Commissioner in Brazil and Minister Counselor of Trade in Mexico. So Paula, you were the first person we thought of when the story broke in Haiti with the assassination of the president. You and I talked a few days ago about what might be the approach, and when I did a bit of reading, I realized just how little I knew about Haiti, and thought we might start with asking you to speak for a few minutes to set the country into context for us. Paula, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jim. Nice to see you again, and hopefully I can't see any of my other friends online, but thank you for being there. And Liz, the World Affairs Council, thank you for having me and for thinking of me. I do want to start by offering my condolences to the Haitian people. They do not deserve more chaos and violence, and we're all presently watching everything on a tightrope. So, you know, as we further our discussions, I just wanted to give a thought to the Haitian people. To put a bit into context, Haiti is a very, very complex country. A very small little history lesson to put it in the historical context, because Haiti's present is very much linked, and it's a product of its history. You know, Haiti declared itself independent from France in 1804. It was the first Black independent republic. Of course, this is a profound challenge and a threat to fundamental order and economics of the day. It was still dominated by slavery and colonialism. Um, Saint-Domingue, as it was known, was very important to France. 60% of the world coffee would, go to Europe from Haiti, all the sugar. Anyway, it was very, very difficult for France to actually recognize Haiti, and they did not recognize Haiti as an independent country for another 2 decades. The USA actually did not recognize the Haiti either until 1862, of course, after the secession of the southern slave states. I mean, it was all very tied to that. So this is very deep rooted and deep seated. We then went through a period of, once France recognized it, most of you know, the French made Haiti repay its debt to them of the sugar and plantations that they had lost. This imposed a debt, but just to put it mildly, it's about $3 billion today, and Haiti paid it through taking loans with French banks, included interest. So by 1914, 80% of Haiti's economy was going to service its debt, and then not to France, but the U.S. by this time was in there. And the U.S., of course, then came in 1915. Woodrow Wilson brought in the Marines because of the assassination of Guillaume Sam, or at least that was under the guise of following the assassination of Guillaume Sam. So the conflicts arose right away, and the Marines in the U.S. stayed in Haiti from 1915 to 1934. The student uprisings started around 1929, but there was 2 things that happened there. The Americans changed the Constitution for foreigners to be able to own land, and that was for the sugarcane plantations and companies to come in. And of course, they started to round up the men as labor. There's a very deep-seated feeling, and still today, the Haitian population, they're agronomists, they want their plot of land, and they just need that land, and they don't want to be part of a bigger agglomeration, which sees that whole dynamic that occurs in Haiti, that not just wasn't it recognized, it also didn't ever realize his dreams of independence because of the difference in opinion of the people who ran the country of where they should be going and where they are. I'll really jump ahead. There was a 10 years of what they referred to as golden years from about 46 to 56 under 2 prime ministers, Estimé and Magloire, but that was short-lived. 10 years is short-lived when the Duvalier era came in. So Papa Doc came in, and he very skillfully was backed by the U.S. because it was 1959 and there was a Cuban Revolution, and Papa Doc very cleverly set himself up as an anti-communist president. Of course, he changed the constitution, became president for life, but he still very much inspired, Haiti as an anti-communist versus Cuba that in the 1959 Cuban Revolution. So that helped the U.S. not, if you will, jump in when the dictatorship became more and more brutal. And of course, in 1970, Baby Doc took over. Now, after that, we had a series of transitions, and this is when it becomes maybe more current for a lot of you. You will hear about the transitional governments, the famous 1987 Constitution, which actually later you'll hear it's at the root of many of the differences and how we cannot move forward in Haiti. But then we had Aristide in 1990. Remember, he was deposed by military, and then Bill Clinton brought him back through Operation Uphold Democracy. And then there was René Préval. René Préval was the first electedly democratic president, or second, sorry, electedly democratic president after Aristide, but that finished his term without being ousted and passed on the mantle, if you will, through a normal democratic election. So it wasn't too long ago, in 2001, when this transfer of power occurred for the first time in Haiti. Then, of course, Aristide came back. There was a coup d'etat. There was interim government for 2 years, and finally, since 2006, things were going well for Haiti. René Préval came back. He was doing the consultation that is needed, and privatization of government companies, agrarian reform, etc. And 2010, the earthquake in Haiti. So things were looking up, and of course, all of you do know about the earthquake in Haiti, so I won't belabor that, um, and I'll stop there. But that's really a context and that whole historical background that is still there today.
But regarding the earthquake, 200,000 people died, 1 million people were displaced. I mean, it was just horrendous. And I was thinking about percentages of what that would mean in the United States last night. And it's awfully hard to recover from something like that.
It is, and that was our humanitarian aid that came in, and it was, just Canada was $4 million a day at one point. But yeah, so we really stepped in, and we did a lot during the earthquake. Humanitarian aid went into the infrastructure of the country, which is usually needed. Yeah.
Well, one of the things, and I'm sure the United States and Canada may have different interests in Haiti, and I hope you'll point those out, but about 27 years ago, President Biden, then Senator Biden, famously said, if Haiti, a god-awful thing to say, if Haiti just quietly sunk into the Caribbean or rose up 300 feet, it wouldn't matter a whole lot in terms of our national interest. Paula, what are our interests? Why do we care about Haiti?
Well, Haiti, the Caribbean, Latin America, we're all in the same neighborhood. We very much, care about stability, rule of law, democracy. I mean, these are the staples of our democracies, both Canada and the United States, and the European Union, that of course we work with in Haiti and elsewhere. But in the Americas, we really do want to focus on having rule of law and democracy. And I think it's very, very important that we uphold Haiti. There are brothers and sisters. I mean, there is obviously that non-altruistic side, if you will, that we saw, unfortunately, when desperate people have no food. They do desperate things, and we're seeing it now in the Mediterranean. You're having boat people. You remember the whole expression? It was the front page of the Time magazine in the 80s. So, we don't want to find ourselves there. And also because we do believe in the rule of law and also in humanitarian assistance.
And 35%, I mean, let's just put things in perspective right now. 35% of Haitians are suffering acute hunger. It's considered one of the poorest countries in the world. Talk about as well the diaspora. There's 1.2 million Haitians or people of Haitian heritage in the United States, and how many make up the Canadian diaspora?
We have 168,000, Haitians, mostly in Montreal, and mostly it was the diaspora that left during Papa Doc's rule at the end of the 50s. A lot of our doctors, lawyers, instrumental Saint-Justine, and they go back to Haiti, obviously, to help out. Diaspora is extremely important. A third of the national budget in Haiti comes from the diaspora. So it's very critical to their well-being. Well, a bit like we're seeing in Cuba, quite frankly.
And when you let's go forward for a minute. And if I'd asked you 2 months ago to describe the President Moise, how would you have described him? And how well did you know him?
Well, I actually was part of what they call the core group, and I was the ambassador there when we had the transition of power between Martelly. So I was there most of the years with Martelly. The last year, of course, transitioning to Jovenel Moise presidency. So I got introduced to Jovenel Moise. That's President Martelly with his wife Sophia, who I went to high school with actually. So. And the transition of power occurred very smoothly. President Martelly handpicked Jovenel Moise. He brought him to the Canadian official residence and to the embassy to introduce him, like he did with all the other ambassadors, to introduce this new figure in his party, B.Sc.Queen. He was an unassuming agricultural man. I mean, he was known as Banana Man because he got later on. Of course, there was allegations. He had this industry called agritrans, and that he was going to be the first major exporter of bananas. Later on, it came out that it was a very nice and big lucrative contract, but not many bananas were found and not much export after that. Unfortunately, under the cloud of him being anointed president, the whole Petrocaribe scandal blew up.
Tell people what that is associated with Venezuela, but
yes, absolutely. Sorry. So the Petrocaribe scandal is $4 billion basically of subsidized gasoline that Venezuela has given to Haiti, for, and I don't quite remember how many years, Jim. Was it 5 or 6? But it is a large amount of money, and what the Cour de Cassation, what the courts found, was at 2 billion. Half of it was missing. So this whole subsidy of gasoline became a real issue because, of course, without the subsidies, he would have to increase gas prices, which so soon after he became president, the riots began. I mean, Martelly and Preval before him, they tried to increase the price of gas because they needed to pay off some of their debts, but they couldn't. The local population will rise when something that's their basic mode of transportation is little scooters, etc. So he didn't start out well, and he was not literate. He wasn't a great speaker, and also since he started ruling by decree, he became very worrisome. He started ruling by decree, but we'll discuss that perhaps later. In January of last year, which means he became more and more autocratic. And of course, in Haiti, we're very suspicious of autocratic, regimes and people who become more and more autocratic. So he did some bizarre things at the end. He instituted his own intelligence army, which is very reminiscent of Papadoc. So that was very scary. He went off on a tangent, we don't know why he went to Morocco and all of a sudden recognized Morocco and a consulate in the Western Sahara. As you know, the United Nations, the U.S. and Canada do not recognize the Western Sahara. Haiti is the only country in the world left, actually, that recognizes, it could be one other, that recognizes Taiwan, and not just China. So he was doing things that just seemed a bit erratic, and all to consolidate power. That is what was coming out of the Haitian media, the Haitian press, and the Friends.
Well, we won't go into it now, but United States certainly changed its position on the Abraham Accords regarding the Western Sahara and Morocco. But that would be another good program for us to talk about. Let's talk about the Constitution, because you told me a few days ago that Haiti's Constitution adopted the worst parts of the U.S. and the French constitutions. Why doesn't it work? Why? And your counterpart in Haiti, Ambassador Morin, said that we never, the United States, or no one did anything to address the underlying weaknesses institutionally and democratically over the past several years, so we should not be surprised that the lid blew off again. Why hasn't Haiti been able to establish meaningful, long-established institutions in a civil society?
Yeah. Let's go to your Constitution first. And Peter, I served with Peter Mulroney as well as Ambassador Pam White. So those were the two American ambassadors while I was there. It is very, I'll just pick one thing in the Constitution. It's a Constitution. When I said that to you, it was because there's so many elections in that Constitution. They have to elect a president directly. The president then, with the consent of Parliament, appoints a prime minister and ministers, etc. But then there's elections for mayors, what you call Kazakhs, and bottom line is Haiti doesn't have the money to have an election every 2 years, like for senators, for deputies, for the presidential elections. That's an awful lot of elections, and so right there you will fall into that pattern of not having a governing body, not having elections that will not institute new senators. This is what happened. That is why he could rule by decree. We were in a similar situation when Peter Mulroney was there, actually. in that Martelli could have also not held elections, and there's, to be simple, I'll just talk about the Senate. There's a whole deputies as well, but the senators, there's 30 senators, and you need to have 20 to have quorum, to have a legislature that can then counter the balance of the executive of the president. Well, and 10 get elected every 2 years. Okay, that was just to set up the context. So there was, all of a sudden, you only have 10 senators left. You only have 10 actually elected officials in the entire country today. And that's because they allowed them to go through. Martelli, what happened with him was he prolonged by a year, 10 other senators. So he would still have a Senate. So he could not rule by decree. And that was, I think all of us, working together, but the Haitians really seeing that they were at an abyss. Unfortunately, this time, the abyss was there again, but there was no elections held. So I'll stop there with the Constitution.
But Paula, just quickly define, because I know we have some students on the line. When you say governed by decree, what do you mean?
It means that there is no checks and balances. It means that there is no parliament to approve or not approve him appointing a prime minister. It means that he just appointed to have the elections and to have a referendum on the Constitution. He appointed everyone directly himself. He did not follow what the Constitution says, is that you have to consult the sectors of civil society, of academia, of the associations, business, in order to put together a credible council. It's called the CEP, le Conseil électoral provisoire. So it's the electoral council. So even the one that's there today in place was just appointed by him. So because by decree. So you're a dictator. You can just, anything you put out, you just tell the people that this is what you're doing. There is no checks and balances.
It won't surprise you that our mutual friend Ray Termody has a question. And he asks, why has Haiti had such difficulty developing? You've touched on some of that, but would you elaborate?
I think it's a question of, well, I talked about the political dysfunction, so there's never a proper governance, and that's due to the Constitution in a lot, but it's also because of the weak institutions. Haiti has never developed strong enough institutions, a strong enough judiciary. Another of President Moise's actions was he just fired 3 of the Supreme Court judges, a little while ago this year. So without proper institutions, you will never be able to have good governance. So I think this is where the Haitian people, the Haitian people have to get together, and it has to be a Haitian solution. But the different sectors of Haiti, I know that there's some that are now trying, we're working together, trying to see what the path forward will be. And they need to strengthen their institutions, and that's where maybe then the international community, let's look at the Haitian priorities and see where we can support them.
Let's talk about gangs, because that plays such a big role in Haiti's situation now.
Gangs. So there was always gangs, and in the Cité de Soleil, in the Jalousie, that neighborhood you may have seen was next to the president's house. But they were always controlled as long as MINUSTA was there. I remember talking to General Jaborangi, who was a Brazilian general. It was Brazilian troops that were in charge of the MINUSTA, the last MINUSTA contingent that, as you may know, the UN left in 2017. But he would tell me, the arms are still coming in, and unfortunately, what it is, it's how'd you say? It's a bit of a perfect storm. I mean, it's in the interest of the gangs and the drug lords to keep Haiti in a chaotic, unstable environment, because that way they can come in with the drugs from South America, mostly, and with impunity.
What drugs and where are they coming from in South America?
Yeah, well, so I'm not an expert in this. I mean, you have your DEA, who's very involved with others from my RCMP, etc. But it's cocaine and it's marijuana. When I was there, I'm sure there's other drugs, but heroin was also an up and coming one when we were there, from Colombia and Venezuela. I mean, there's the drug trafficking routes are quite complex, and I don't know them all, but that's grosso modo where they come from, and they could easily, you know, come into Haiti. When I was there, they actually caught there's lots of little airplane strips, you know, that are dirt airplane strips that I know the Americans were helping the Haitian government discover them and, you know, destroy them. But one of the planes that they did catch, you know, had the Venezuelan President Maduro at the time's family member in that plane, you know, and so there was a direct connection. The other direct connection is with there was a senator. He was going to be a sitting senator, Guy Philippe, and the DEA did come into Haiti while I was there, and they had 1 week where they did not have immunity. You have immunity in Haiti if you are a sitting member of parliament, and also while you run to be a sitting member of parliament. But DEA did come in and pick up one of the potential, you know, to-be senators, and because he was very much associated with the drug cartels. So I think they're intimately involved.
We have a question from Facebook Live, and Diana Birdwell, and she asks, how accurate and applicable is Jared Diamond's book Collapse, where he compares Haiti and Dominican Republic? And I remember a number of years ago being on in the Caribbean and just looking out and seeing dramatic difference between the two countries.
Yeah. You know, I know Jared's books, but I haven't read that book. So
But why the difference in development?
Comment on it. Well, you know, I mean, they came, as I started with the context, the historical context, the plantations started to actually devastate the forest. All of that hardwood forest got cut down, was being sent to Europe. Plantations need sugarcane and coffee, but sugarcane especially needs a lot of land area. Yeah, and this is a very bleak and stark picture. They also, on the Dominican side, they had a bloody dictator, actually, that was a Haitian massacre with that bloody dictator in place called Trujillo, Dictator Trujillo. But Trujillo, since he was a dictator, he wanted some forests and the forests intact. So he actually set up the national park system. There's 5 national parks in Dominican Republic. So right there, the contrast, the historical contrast of the protection of the land, you know, is quite stark. And then we don't forget that the population, the demographics. I mean, there's no real census that has been done in the last few years, but everybody talks about there being between 11 and 12 million people in Haiti, and on the other side of the island, Dominican Republic has 3/4 of the island, and as you see, more fertile, and they don't have as many people. So there's an unbalance. There's a definite unbalance.
Well, this may be an unfair question because new information comes out every day, but I suspect you've been talking with some of your colleagues and friends. What do you think was behind the assassination? And I mean, it seems so ragtag. I mean, it just was a very strange situation where many of the perhaps Colombian mercenaries didn't even know what the operation they had signed onto was about.
Yeah, well, it's my friends in Haiti, as we know, there's so many stories and rumors, and with the social media these days, I mean, circulating what happened, what didn't happen. I mean, there are obviously some facts, you know, that we can say we now know because they've been corroborated by both the Haitian government, the Colombian government, and the FBI that is on the ground to help. It is very good for Haiti to have the technical support and expertise of others. It is a very odd situation. It's very odd that professional mercenaries would not have an exit plan. I mean, that comes to everyone's mind. On the other hand, was it hubris? Did they really think that the Haitian National Police wasn't that well organized? The Haitian National Police, and there's some very good people and officers in that police, they've only really been, if you will, trained, and it's the U.S. and Canada actually through our development programs that have that have helped to train the Haitian National Police. So I mean, they're not quite there yet. When I left, I know, and when MINUSTA left, right? MINUSTA also supported a lot of them. So perhaps they underrated, you know, the efficacité, the efficiency of the police. Maybe they also thought that the president, as we now have heard, as many of you have seen, right, that Martin Moise is back. Those are the Colombian detainees. And many of you have heard Martin Moise is now back in Haiti. And so she has her account, and she was there. So they are, you know, they're taking that seriously, and that they were there. They did not know who the president was. They were apparently talking on the phone to make sure they could identify him.
Let me ask you a question about her, because I really don't know anything, but we have seen sometimes spouses take the position of their spouse. Does she have any political legitimacy?
I'm not there on the ground, but I have not heard that. The first little flare I heard of that suggestion that she might be interested is that she came back so quickly, you know. But she may have her own reasons for that. She never, we never saw her be up front. She was always, you know, behind her man. But then again, so was Simone Duvalier with Papadoc. So we don't know. But I just wish that I wish her the best, and that she recovers, and that her two children, you know, they're back home with the family. So I think that's very important, and probably a very good reason for her to be there too.
So tell us what happened today. And Claude Joseph yesterday looked like he was going to be president interim, and now we have Ariel Henry, or
Ariel Henry, yes, a neurosurgeon. I've met him. Very, very smart, skilled man. This was a bit. It was a bit odd, of course, because as you may know, Jovenel Moise had fired Claude Joseph, and he had was going to install Ariel Henry the day he died, and then of course they have to, because he doesn't have a parliament. Usually parliament, this is where it becomes all nebulous. Parliament approves the prime minister selection of the president, but since there was no parliament, Jovenel Moise has been appointing prime ministers, you know, as he wants, and his prime ministers haven't lasted long. They keep revolving. As soon as something goes wrong, he just appoints another prime minister, you know, as opposed to dealing with some of the issues of why the prime minister, you know, couldn't deal with X or Y. So he had put Jovenel Moise out. The core group, which is Canada, the U.S., the European Union. We're chaired by the UN Secretary General in Haiti. Put out a core group statement that said that they were going to be now working with the Prime Minister par interim, Ariel Henry. And therefore, this morning, without that international support, the Prime Minister Claude Joseph, and they're all going to be par interim, means acting. They're all going to be acting prime ministers because there's no parliament. So this is Claude Joseph that has just stepped down, just announced he was stepping down. He did, by the way, act very well. Right after the assassination, he didn't hide anywhere. He called a session of ministers. He came out to the press. He called the national police. He had regular, and I watch his regular press conferences where he would tell the population what was going on. So in terms of communication, I think he did a good job to stabilize the country from immediate chaos. There is no chaos. I mean, it's actually quite quiet from what I've heard. And then we just move on. Oh, and he will be named. He used to be Foreign Affairs Minister, so Ariel Henry will keep him in his ministerial cabinet as Minister of Foreign Affairs. So this is as far as we know, the latest a few hours ago.
All right, and it may be different tomorrow. Let me bring in Ambassador Charles Shapiro, who is the president of the World Affairs Council in Atlanta. And his question is, what should the democratic community in general, and Canada and the U.S. in particular, do over the next 3 months?
I think what we have to do is help Haitians sit down and have a dialogue. This is kind of like looking to the future, if you will, kind of question, and it's very complex. But the first thing we have to do is really have there has to be a dialogue with all the actors, with all the Haitian actors for a solution, a path forward. That's, as I said, the civil society associations, academia, the political parties, because they're always divided. And also a political party, for you to have an awareness. When we have presidential elections, the slate of presidential candidates, there are over 50 pictures on that slate.
Now,
Because,
are they different political parties or?
yes, because I think you have to be 10 people to have a political party. So, many people have aspirations. So perhaps perhaps a dialogue on having fewer political parties, which means that people have to work together. And what is our role? That's a good question. The international community, I think, has to let the Haitians prioritize and have a path forward. But we can definitely and should ease the conversation. We can help players that maybe perhaps are hard, that they don't want to talk to each other, facilitate that. It's happened before in the past with the OAS. CARICOM played a very interesting and solid role in Guyana, so maybe, let's look at the CARICOM. So those are the interventions, if you will, of outside actors, but really is to just figure out that the Haitians have to figure out who is the government, what do we need, and ease that conversation, and then move forward and move forward to have credible elections. Because at the end of the day, you will need credible elections to have a functioning government, which will then we can talk about the institutions.
Do you think there's any chance that the elections will take place as previously scheduled in September?
Oh, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's impossible. There's as I said, the electoral council that has been even appointed isn't agreed to. It's unconstitutional. So, the first thing perhaps in part of the dialogue they should say is to appoint a respected electoral council. Without that, elections will bring any result it will bring will have no legitimacy whatsoever. So I really don't think September is on. If people work very, very, very hard, maybe the end of the year, beginning of 2022, we really need to, be there and help them out, because of course there's a whole financial and technical assistance for elections that we can help in, and don't forget the constitutional reform that I mentioned at the very beginning.
Right. So I'm holding an article that Ambassador Jim Stavridis wrote for Bloomberg last week. And the headline is, "Ending Chaos in Haiti is not a job for U.S. troops." President Biden, at least thus far, has been emphatic, saying that troops are not going. He'll send some humanitarian assistance and advisors on civil society. And yet there are still calls in some of the U.S. media and some Haitians for the United States to send troops. What are your thoughts?
I don't think troops will fix anything. We have seen the last, since 2004, we've had UN missions, bilateral, multilateral. We've tried to do a lot of things, but it won't fix the real issue. And the real issue is governance issues. And that's where Haitians have to come together and decide how they want to govern their country, who's going to govern it, have the proper players in place. And then we can continue to help, for example, reinforcement of the Haitian National Police for security, because security is the cornerstone, of having, free and fair elections. In a way, people need to be safe to go and have an election. So all of that, they're all kind of cogs in the wheel of where we go. But foreign troops going in will not fix anything. That is not the fundamental issue.
And the UN troops were there for how long? They left in 2017 under not a very good cloud of success. But tell us about their role.
Well, it depends the articles you read. So overall, the impact, if you will, is minimal, and it's minimal because you look at it today. What happens is that the gains that they did make, i.e. they stopped a lot of those arms. They stopped the gangs, the little marchands in the Cité du Soleil and in the poor neighborhoods. They felt safe, you know, and they told the UN troops, Brazilian troops, and they were backed by the, as I said, it was a Brazilian general, it was a Chilean #2, and it's always a Canadian #3, because we have definite expertise on logistics, on helping out. So yes, we had an impact. It's just that it doesn't stay. It's short-lived once we leave. And the biggest impact the UN had, which is why the reputation and we don't, you know, the Haitians didn't want them back, is cholera. Is quite frankly cholera that was brought. For those of you who don't know, the Nepalese troops up north, unfortunately, one of them did have cholera, and you're in a country with poor sanitation, so it spread quite quickly. And of course, with the malnutrition and the general health of people and the sanitation, it was quite devastating to Haiti. And so that all of that, it just tars, you know, the UN with a bad brush. But they did do some good. It's just not long lasting.
I want you to comment on foreign assistance, because Haiti has received so much aid, private and public, over decades, and some of it has been probably lined politicians' pockets. Right now, or rather after the earthquake, Haiti received $10 billion in donations, which represent 150% of its GDP. And it strikes me that it's a little bit like when we think about Afghanistan, that we've put in so much assistance, so many dollars, billions of dollars, that it makes it very hard for the country to become self-sustaining and develop its own budget.
I think that's a different context. Well, first, I think Afghanistan is in the trillions, but
True.
the billions in the context of the earthquake in Haiti, it really was humanitarian assistance.
But even beyond the earthquake, like now, I mean, you're seeing so much.
Well, and now it's kind of, yeah, the development assistance, but to the large amounts of the humanitarian assistance, I think did help the country a lot. A lot of the infrastructure had to be rebuilt, and when you talk infrastructure, you talk larger amounts of money. I think development aid, and this is where there's that debate. It does, and some people have said, well, we still do need it. You can't abandon the poorest of the poor people. Some people will refer to it because there's collateral good in giving a developmental aid, which is one way to look at it. But a lot of the aid we give, as I said, is what we have to do is more coordination. I think there's a lack of coordination with our aid, and we have to look at the Haitian priorities in order to, and then the international community has to coordinate their aid. We had started to do that. Well, after the earthquake, etc. But when I was there, actually, I was chair of a round table of ambassadors in order to start talking. For the Haitian government does have an aid coordination unit. It's just that they weren't very effective. So we talked about, and we go back to that institution building. So some of the aid, you know, the development dollars could have gone to do better institutional building, so we could have had a better capacity for coordination. And therefore you would have had a larger impact for development dollars. But there is an impact. I think I decry anybody who says there hasn't been an impact, because we have, you know, increased the health, the education. Well, the PNH, the Haitian National Police, is a good example of governance, you know, even though not much money goes into the governance side of things. And maybe this is where Haiti would like us to prioritize a bit more of our development dollars in order to help them build an institution and get more security in the country. So it all flows together. And I don't think troops would help. It won't fix anything. I don't think cutting development aid fixes anything. And let me just go to the private aid. Mm-hmm. There's some very good private donation NGOs, and I want to mention, well, there's one actually from Texas. Of course, there's the is it the One Drop, and I haven't talked to Jack in ages, but I knew he was doing work in Haiti. But the other one is, for example, the Small Farmers Holders Alliance. They're doing phenomenally well, And the communities, and this goes back to the history and the past of Haitians, the communities themselves organize very, very well. The Small Farmers Holders Alliance, I just got in the mail from Timberland the first pair of sneakers made out of Haitian cotton, because they have restarted cotton production. And Moringa is another, production. So there are some pockets, and this quite frankly is supported. USAID does put in some support, and I don't think I think the rest is private. And it is working. So you have that success story. I just want to leave with a good positive note.
Sure.
There is that success story occurring in Haiti today.
Yeah, it's a success story, but still 4/5 of the population live in poverty.
So we have to duplicate that. You see, this is a small microcosm of what could happen with agrarian reform, with people having proper land titles.
So you've touched on this, but let me reframe it in the words of a member of our audience, Tarek Rajev. What would be the most promising path for Haitians to achieve stability? You've touched on institutions, but give us 2 or 3 of the top priorities.
Constitutional reform would be at the top. An honest dialogue among all actors in society, and they could call upon us or not for help, and elections. And then once you have those things in place, you can shore up institutions, and then we will have a nascent functioning democracy and country.
Mm-hmm. I want to be sure I get in as many questions as possible. We have another one from Facebook from Diane again. You've touched on the police, but Diane asked, how stable is the military? And I'll add, what is its role?
So the military got abolished after Baby Doc and with Aristide and in that time area, and Michel Martelly, President Martelly, as one of his promises in the PHTK party, he promised to bring back the military. There's many people there that remember the Duvalier years as stability, security, and many believe that maybe it's because there was an army. So they wanted to reconstitute an army. At that time, and I don't know the position of governments today, because as you know, I'm retired. But at that time, the United States and Canada and the core group did not support Haiti putting money in to recreate a military when they don't have enough money to even pay their Haitian National Police. That's something I want to add that should be top of the list, is pay the police, the Haitian National Police, regularly, so they will become more stable and they won't try and get a second and third job or doing something else. So yeah, I just
Yeah, that's a good answer. What about human rights and freedom of the press?
Yeah,
Let's do freedom of the press first.
Yeah, so freedom of the press, again, we had freedom of the press when I was there. It's the ruling by decree ends up, and there was a journalist that was killed, and he was actually a dear friend of a friend of mine, so it was quite emotional for many people, and it was just recently, and so there seemed to be a repression of the press, but I don't know if it wasn't a repression like we've seen in some other countries. I was about to mention some, but I won't. It's not a systematic repression, but they are in danger. They are in danger if people don't like what they're saying, and so I think that's very dangerous, and they should be protected.
And human rights, protection of women and so forth?
Yeah, well, human rights is, the protection of women and girls is the cornerstone still of our feminist international policy and our feminist development policy in Canada and the U.S. as well. We very much, again, we set up units in the Haitian National Police just of women police, so they could speak to the women and children that are being abused, because there's a whole obvious history there that you don't trust a man police, you don't male police, so we need to be very aware of human rights abuses. There's certain sections of the police that were accused of human rights abuses. You see some of the gangs, but they do human rights abuses all the time, but they're not held accountable like an institution. So I think we have to be very careful, and that is a very good question, because I think we should continue, if you want to talk about development aid and foreign aid, in helping the Haitians with their priorities. I think this is where we can continuously mention how important it is.
And COVID-19, you told me that they received their first vaccines, I think you said yesterday, is that?
Yeah, 2-3 days ago now, maybe 2 days ago. But yeah, what happened there was the U.S. was going to send the vaccines, like it did in other parts of the world, to Haiti as well, and it was the AstraZeneca vaccine. And this is my understanding, so I should have double checked this with you, because this is just my friends writing to me. He refused it because the AstraZeneca vaccine, he thought it was just dumping of a vaccine that wasn't very good. He didn't believe it was as good as the Pfizer and Moderna, and so he just refused the shipment of AstraZeneca vaccine. But it's murky apart from the belief, and it was a strong belief by many, obviously, that AstraZeneca didn't work. But it was still a travesty that there was no vaccines before. Moderna, by the way, is the one that came in a couple of days ago.
Well, I hope that's a good one. That's the one I had.
Well, I had AstraZeneca, so I think any vaccine is a good vaccine, but we won't go there.
Paula, I don't want to let you go without taking advantage of your knowledge of not just Haiti, but the Caribbean and particularly Cuba. And, it seems right now that Cuba and South Africa are getting more attention than Haiti. The president's inbox is quite full. What's happening in Haiti? I mean, in Cuba?
Well, I'm not a Cuban expert, but what is happening in Cuba? Well, how many Cubans do you have in the United States? You mentioned 1.5 million Haitians, so I think you have a few more Cubans.
Right.
So yeah, so
they're a very powerful constituency.
Listen, all I'm aware of that's happening in Cuba, and we talked about it for Haiti in the beginning on remittances, how important the diaspora are. I know that a few years ago, and it hasn't been reversed with your new administration, Western Union got shut down in the United States, and that is the major conduit, if you will, to send remittances to Cuba. And the last I heard, there was $3 billion of remittances that weren't getting to Cuba, and that's huge. So multiply that by all the people on the street. Is probably who's out there that is no longer getting their family's extra income, which is
Cuba is really a country where the U.S. and Canada have very different interests.
Yes, we do.
Let's go back to Haiti again for a minute, because if the OAS has played a role on again, off again with Haiti, is there a role for the OAS, and how might it work with the United Nations?
Yeah. Definitely, the OAS is part of that core group. And they're an instrumental part of that core group.
And I should say the Organization of American States.
Yes, the Organization of American States has a representative in Haiti. They are a part of the core group. You have the OAS, the UN is the chair of that group, with the US, Canada, OAS, Germany, Brazil, Chile, France, of course. And they're instrumental. They're instrumental in that group. They were also instrumental during President Martelly's time. They came and spoke to him and brokered, at the 11th hour, a deal that President Martelly would step down on his departure in February and put in a transition government. As you saw, Jovenel Moise did not step down and accept a transitional government. So that was a big difference, and the OAS played a key role.
So let's let Ray Termini ask the last question. And it'll make you happy because it'll be an upbeat one, I think. please ask Paula to tell us a bit about Haitian culture and its influence on the country's development.
Mm. Oh, I think Haitian culture is, well, actually behind me, I just know behind me, all my Haitian paintings are everywhere in the house.
No paintings from Dallas, huh?
Well, I have one in another room, the skylight of Dallas, Jim, just for you to know. So, yeah, the culture of Haiti is very important because it's also rooted in many ways to its religion, the original religion of Voodoo, which is important to the rural community. So we're not talking about the urban Haiti. We're talking also about the colorful, vibrant colors that they use, the dance that they have, and they do beautiful jewelry and and the colorful clothing that they wear. So it instills, it makes you happy. So Ray, thank you very much. And I think the Haitian people are a happy people. They're resilient people. I mean, the chaos that they've gone through, and as you have said, Jim, the poverty, and they still manage to produce art that is just.
And I see Liz, and before she pops on, if someone wants, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, and maybe you can suggest a website. If someone wants to help Haiti, where might they go? What would you recommend?
Oh, how about if they contact Liz in the World Affairs Council, because there's there's a lot of NGOs in Texas, and there's also like that Small Farmers Holders Alliance. It's actually based out of New York. It's not even America. It's American. Yeah, could we do that through the World
Maybe
Affairs?
you can send some suggestions to Liz,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but we know often when we do programs like this, people will contact and say, "What can I do?"
Yeah.
Paula,
There's
go ahead.
no problem in contacting me directly either, but if instead of like giving my email out to the
Oh, we're
webinar,
happy to do it through the
if-
council.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, if
no
you can
problem
just
at all.
call Liz and she'll have my contact information.
great to be with you, Paula, and back to you, Liz.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much. What an excellent discussion. I just thanks to you for offering our members such important insight as more information comes to us daily from Haiti. I think these types of programs are really important. I'd also like to thank again President Charles Shapiro and his team over at the World Affairs Council of Atlanta for their promotional support. And to catch up on our past programs, head over to our YouTube channel at DFW World. And if you're not a member of the council yet, please join us. We'd love to see you more, and I look forward to meeting you in person soon at our Welcome Back reception on September 9th. Visit dfwworld.org for more information on membership and programming. And with that, I thank you again for joining us, and have a good evening.
All